But there are weird peculiarities in the graphics on the CMMC webpage. I made a LinkedIn post about this. Our buddy Jacob Hill actually messaged me saying, "Hey, there's a diagram on the webpage showing the 3 levels of CMMC, but the numbers are different than what they were before."
And this isn't the first time that's happened either.
This isn't the first time it's happened, right? So there's this famous, the purple, green, blue, 3-tier diagram that's on there that sort of shows the changes from 1.0 and 5 levels to 2.0.
The 2.0 calling card.
Yeah. It's got this sort of infographic, and it says, hey, at CMMC level 1, there's 17 requirements. And at CMMC level 2, there's 110 requirements. And at CMMC level 3, there's 110 plus, because the number of requirements out of 800, 172 is TBD at this point. And that's been the diagram that we've had forever. And the diagram that popped up specified a number of controls for CMMC level 3 and said there are 15 rather than 17 requirements at CMMC level 1. And so, I made a bit of a sarcastic post about the fact that watching this back and forth is sort of like watching pro wrestling, because every once in a while, right, you're like, I don't know what to believe here. And every once in a while, reality peeks through and you're like, I think they really hit that guy. And so when they say, hey, we're getting ready to put the rule to OMB and we're not going to make very many changes, and then there's this new update to this picture, you're like, well, are those the numbers that are going to be in the rule? Like, did they accidentally push the update too early? One specific detail, though, one of the most common frustrations that people express about CMMC is that the requirements keep changing, right? And the requirements are always different. And I think that this diagram that popped up fuels that criticism, because they'll say, well, you said 17 requirements at CMMC level 1, and now it says 15. And this is why I don't want to get started, because you keep changing the requirements. Right. And so I'm going to wait until the requirements are stable for me to really invest time and money and effort, because this is ridiculous. Totally understandable. The frustrating part about this is that the requirements are the same, right? The best way to understand the changes from CMMC 1.0 to CMMC 2.0 is to understand what existed before CMMC 1.0 and what exists today, right? Before CMMC 1.0, everybody had the 15 basic requirements in a FAR clause 52204-21. 15 very basic security requirements.
The FAR 15.
And then folks...
FAR 15.
Yeah, the FAR basic, the FAR 15 requirements. If you fast forward to CMMC 1.0, they say you have 17 requirements at CMMC level 1. And so you go, oh, well, they added 2 requirements. They've changed the requirements. They're increasing the requirements. And then now you see under CMMC 2.0, this diagram that says, well, we're back to 15. So they must have gotten rid of 2 requirements. And this is probably something that I think we'll write a blog post about this to sort of map it out. But here's the deal, folks. If you go look up FAR 52204-21, the clause, which we'll add the link to, it shows you the list of all 15 requirements. And you'll notice that the 10th requirement, let's see if I get it right here. The requirement that discusses, let me make sure I find it so I don't give everybody the wrong information. The 9th requirement, the requirement that discusses physical controls is different than the other requirements because it has semicolons in it. This is literally why it went from 15 to 17. So every other requirement in the list of 15 is a single statement. The requirement listed on number 9 has semicolons, multiple statements. And so what they did was they said, instead of 15 requirements, we're going to break out those 2 semicolons and we're going to make it 2 other requirements. Completely the same, exactly the same, same language, same everything, same controls in 800-171 that correspond to these 15 controls, exactly the same. So for them to have gone from 15 controls in FAR basic to 17 controls in CMMC 1.0 level 1, not actually a change in those level 1 requirements, for them to have gone back to 15 requirements in CMMC 2.0 level 1, not a change in the requirements. It's literally a completely arbitrary difference in terms of the number. So the specific language here is escort visitors and monitor visitor activity, semicolon, maintain audit logs of physical access, semicolon, and control and manage physical access devices. If you go look in the CMMC model documentation on the CMMC website today at level 1, you'll see that those 3 requirements map to 3.10.3, 3.10.4, and 3.10.5. They just took those 3 sentences in between the semicolons and made them their own requirements, and you have 17 all of a sudden. You go back to the original version, you put them in a single sentence, and you're back to 15 requirements. Now, that's very interesting, right? I think it probably clarifies what's going on, but man, what are we doing?
Yeah,
like, what?
You don't need additional things to complicate the process, right? Now everybody thinks that there's changes abroad. Oh no, it's switching again. So then some of that confidence disappears in the entire program. I can't blame them. Cannot.
No, you can't. Of course. Listen, I mean,
here we go again, right? That's kind of like the impression I got.
This is what we said. Everybody lives in glass houses, but it's stuff like this where it just watching the DoD shoot themselves in the foot, and you don't see the AB clarify it, right? And you don't see, I mean, I blame industry the least, right? Because although it is obvious when you see it, the amount of time and effort that it would take for a normal business owner or somebody working IT and security for a business to go dig into this and make that realization is pretty unreasonable, right? I mean, it's just not something that normal people are going to do. So it is on the DoD and the AB and other, entities in the ecosystem to clarify what's going on. And something as simple as saying, oh, well, you don't have 15 requirements because of these semicolons. It's actually 17 things. So we're going to write it as 17, causes tremendous backlash because they go, you went from 15 to 17. You're increasing the requirements. You're increasing the cost. You're increasing the burden. They didn't control the narrative. They didn't explain the accounting of going from 15 to 17, not actually representing new requirements. And so when you go back to 15 requirements, everybody goes, see, you're changing it. The requirements aren't stable. How can you possibly ask us to get started on these requirements when you keep doing stuff like this?
When you keep moving the goalposts.
And even though, yeah, of course, you're moving it, you're changing it, the requirements are not stable. And then you and I come around with a podcast and a bunch of LinkedIn posts and we go, did you know that they didn't actually change the requirements? And normal people go, what's going on here? Like, are we taking this seriously? Like, is this really an effort to protect the warfighter and win the war and defeat the Chinese and actually implement basic security hygiene? Why are you jacking around with the changing in the numbers?
Right.
And this is one reason why, back to that question about transparency and proactive communication, this is one reason why government agencies don't talk while they're going through rulemaking, because stuff like this happens, misinterpretations happen, and all of a sudden they get mired in this process of having to sort of run the PR effort, because it doesn't really matter until the rule comes out. The rule says 17, the rule says 15, and then it's an interesting footnote in history that 17 isn't actually more than 15 because blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
Right? So, but it's little things like that where they make changes to what exists already via CMMC 1.0, and then they make changes back to what existed via CMMC 2.0, and they don't explain them. So everybody goes, I'll just wait until the rule comes out.
Yeah, it's like adding parsley on the dish, right? We're trying to do all this stuff to make it taste better for you, but realistically, nobody cares if there's parsley on top of whatever it may be, right?
It's the honeydew melon of the fruit salad.
Do not disrespect honeydew melon.
Well, yeah, I think we can work on our food metaphors in order to drive this point home in the future, but the point is that you had 15 basic requirements via FAR basic before CMMC. You had 17 under CMMC 1.0. It was still the same 15 requirements. They just broke out the sentences according to the semicolons. And they were only the physical protection requirements. And they're already in 800-171 anyways. It didn't actually change anything. Here, we're back to 15 basic requirements. Nothing changed. So it just becomes, it's just so frustrating to have to continuously explain that they're changing it, but not really, right? They made waivers under 2.0, but not really, because nobody's actually going to have realistic access to them, and it's really not a thing that's going to occur. They made POAMs under CMMC 2.0, but not really, because the 5-point controls and the 3-point controls can't be on the POAM, and since 80% of the controls have to be implemented, you can only have a small subset of the 1-point controls unimplemented. So you have a POAM, but not really, right? And they go, well, there's going to be a phased rollout, but not really, because you can't control what the primes do, requiring their supply chain to have stuff implemented. Oh, and there's 15 requirements instead of 17, but not really, because it's the same stuff that there's been under the hood all
same
along.
Amount of determination statements. And the other thing about POAMs,
the same.
I think we have to understand this. You don't pick your POAMs. You're supposed to give the good old college try to every single one of those determination statements, all 320 of them that exist. When you go into the assessment and things aren't performed to satisfaction, that's when this exists, right? You don't want people going into this process thinking, I can give it a try as long as I get to 70%, the 3 and 5s or whatever. No.
Yeah.
You have to give the good old college try everywhere.
Honestly, man, I mean, I totally agree with the POAMs. What you just said, just blew my mind. You're a genius. So
whoa.
The best way to sum up this difference between 15 to 17 back to 15 is to ask the question, did the number of assessment objectives if the number of assessment objectives didn't change, then you could chop it up word for word, colon by colon, comma by comma, and it didn't matter. That is a perfect way of summarizing it. We should probably do the math for that blog post. Just say, what was the number of assessment objectives pre-CMMC 1.0, during CMMC 1.0, and now under CMMC 2.0? They are exactly the same. But of course, this is why it's so important for everybody to understand the assessment objectives, because when you speak in the language of assessment objectives, people have to know what that means. Right?
Getting back to that transparency and the communication. Yes, you should be accustomed to the DoD not saying anything or whatever. But when things like this happen and when things like this come about, I think it would behoove them, especially giving the track record, right, to eliminate some of the PTSD that's associated with it, to be like, hey, guys, we're going to change this because it didn't make sense. And that's not what's happening. Yeah. Hey, we made a mistake. Hey, we thought this was a great idea. Seems to cause confusion. We're trying to align this with already existing requirements. We already know that the controls, the determination statements, the assessment objectives, whatever you want to reference, right, it still all aligns. But the fact of the matter is that if you do something blindly, hoping somebody doesn't notice, and then people notice, guess what happens? You have more explaining to do.
And it's a perfect point, man. I mean, it's a perfect point. Back to that idea of communication and being proactive. I mean, there's a case to be said that they are being very communicative, but every time something like this happens, you're like, what do we do?